I always thought Emma and I had something unshakable. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, a house with a wraparound porch in a neighborhood where the lawns were always trimmed just so. It felt like we'd built a life that could weather anything. I'm Daniel, a software engineer, the kind of guy who likes puzzles, who finds comfort in figuring out how things fit together. Emma was my opposite. A watercolor artist, all soft edges and spontaneity. The kind of woman who could make a room feel warmer just by walking into it. We balanced each other. At least, that's what I told myself. Lately, though, something had shifted. It started small. Little silences that stretched too long over dinner. Her eyes lingering on her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. She'd laugh it off, say it was just a group chat with her art friends. But there was this flicker in her gaze, like she was somewhere else. I didn't push it. I trusted her. Maybe that was my first mistake. The kids, Lila, 10, and Max, 7, kept us busy. Soccer practices, school projects, the usual chaos of family life. But even with all that, I started noticing how often Emma would slip away to her studio in the basement. She'd always loved painting down there, said the quiet helped her think. Lately, though, she'd been locking the door. I just need some space to focus, she'd say, brushing a strand of her chestnut hair behind her ear with that half-smile I used to adore. I'd nod, tell myself it was fine. Artists need their solitude, right? Then there was Ryan. My best friend since college, the guy who'd been my roommate when we were broke and living off ramen, the one who stood beside me at our wedding. He was around a lot, too much maybe looking back. He'd drop by unannounced with a six-pack or some excuse about needing to borrow a tool, and Emma would light up in a way that made my chest tighten. I told myself it was nothing. Ryan was family, practically. But there were moments. His hand brushing hers when they passed a plate at dinner, the way their laughter synced up, that gnawed at me. One night I couldn't sleep. Emma had gone to bed early, claiming a headache, but I'd seen her silhouette through the basement window, hunched over something that wasn't a canvas. I padded downstairs in my socks, the house creaking under my weight. The studio door was cracked open, a faint blue glow spilling out. I peeked inside, and there she was, wearing this sleek headset I'd never seen before, her fingers twitching in the air like she was conducting an invisible orchestra. A laptop hummed beside her, its screen filled with code I recognized, virtual reality protocols, the kind I'd worked on years ago. My stomach dropped. What was she doing with that? I didn't confront her then. I just stood there, watching her move in a world I couldn't see, her lips curling into a smile that wasn't for me. When she finally pulled the headset off, she didn't notice me in the shadows. She stretched, yawned, and headed upstairs, leaving the equipment behind. I waited until her footsteps faded, then slipped into the studio. The headset was still warm when I picked it up. I didn't put it on, not yet, but I knew I'd stumbled onto something that wasn't just about art. That night, I lay awake next to her, her breathing soft and steady, and felt a crack forming in the life I'd built. I didn't know what she was hiding, but I could feel it. Something pulling her away from me, something I couldn't touch. And for the first time in years, I wondered if I really knew the woman sleeping beside me. The next morning, I couldn't shake what I'd seen. Emma was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes for the kids, humming some tune I didn't recognize. She looked so normal, hair tied back, flour dusting her apron, that I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Almost. But that headset, the code on her screen, it wasn't a dream. It was real, and it was eating at me like a splinter I couldn't dig out. I kissed her cheek on my way out, told her I'd be late at the office. She smiled, said something about a gallery deadline, and I nodded like everything was fine. It wasn't. I didn't go to work. Instead, I drove around the block, parked down the street, and waited. Sure enough, 20 minutes after the kids left for school, Ryan's truck rolled into our driveway. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. He didn't knock, just let himself in with that easy familiarity I'd once admired. I gave it 10 minutes, then slipped back into the house through the garage. The place was quiet, the kind of stillness that presses against your ears. I crept downstairs, my pulse thudding in my throat. The studio door was shut, locked again, but I could hear voices. Emma's, soft and playful, and Ryan's low and teasing. My best friend and my wife, behind a door I wasn't supposed to open. I pressed my ear against it, straining to catch words, but it was muffled, like they were speaking through a filter. That's when I remembered the headset. I'd taken a photo of the laptop screen last night, lines of code I hadn't fully processed. Sitting in my car, I pulled up the image on my phone and studied it. It wasn't just VR. It was a custom-built environment, encrypted, tied to a private server. I'm no hacker, but I've spent enough years debugging systems to know how to poke around. I drove to a coffee shop, opened my laptop, and started digging. It took hours, tracing IP addresses, cross-referencing snippets of the code, but I found it. A virtual space they'd created, accessible only with specific credentials. I didn't have the headset with me, but I didn't need it yet. I had enough to guess what was happening. Emma and Ryan weren't just meeting in our basement. They were escaping into a world where I didn't exist. A place where they could be whoever they wanted, free from the kids, the house, me. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. Were they just talking? Planning something? Or was it more? Something I couldn't even name? I went home that afternoon, my head buzzing. Emma was in the living room, sketching, the kids sprawled on the floor with their homework. She looked up, smiled. "You're early," she said. I forced a grin, said something about a slow day. Ryan was gone, his truck nowhere in sight. I waited until bedtime, then slipped back into the studio. The headset was where she'd left it. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over it. Did I really want to know? But I'd come too far to stop. I put it on, booted up the laptop, and logged in with the credentials I'd cracked. The world loaded. A sprawling, sunlit meadow, colors too vivid to be real. And there they were, Emma and Ryan, or at least their avatars, standing by a riverbank. She looked like herself but sharper, her eyes brighter, her laugh echoing in my ears. He was taller, broader, his voice smooth as silk. They didn't see me. I'd entered as a ghost, invisible to them. What I saw next turned my stomach. They weren't just talking. They were tangled in each other, lost in a way that made my chest cave in. I ripped the headset off, my breath ragged. My wife and my best friend, betraying me in a place I couldn't even touch. It wasn't just the act. It was the intimacy, the ease, the way they moved like they'd done this 100 times. I sat there in the dark, the laptop's hum filling the silence, and felt something harden inside me. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was the annihilation of everything I'd believed in. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them. Emma and Ryan. Their perfect little avatars wrapped up in each other, laughing in a world they'd built to shut me out. My wife, the woman I'd vowed to love through every storm, and my best friend, the guy I'd trusted with my life. It wasn't just the betrayal that burned. It was the creativity of it, the effort they'd poured into crafting this hidden paradise. They hadn't just stumbled into this. They'd planned it, nurtured it, made it theirs. By morning, I'd decided. I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. Yelling, crying, smashing things, that's what they'd expect. That's what the old Daniel would have done. But this wasn't about heat anymore. It was about precision. I'd spent my career solving problems, breaking them down into manageable pieces. This was just another puzzle, one I'd dismantle with a cold, steady hand. They'd built a world to escape me. I'd build one to trap them. I started small. Over breakfast, I watched Emma, really watched her. The way she buttered toast for Max, the absent smile she gave Lila as she braided her hair. She was good at this, playing the part. I kept my voice even, asked about her day. "Oh, just painting," she said, her eyes flicking to mine for half a second. Liar. I nodded, sipped my coffee, and let the silence stretch. She didn't notice the shift in me. Good. At work, I called in a favor from an old colleague, Sam, a guy who'd gone freelance doing cybersecurity. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. "I need to monitor a private server," I said. "Nothing illegal, just personal." He didn't ask questions, probably heard the edge in my voice. By noon, he'd sent me a toolkit, software to track activity, log entries, even capture fragments of their VR sessions. I set it up that afternoon, routing it through a spare laptop I kept in the garage. Every time they logged in, I'd know. Next, I studied their world. I'd saved the access codes from the night before, and while the kids were at school and Emma was painting, I slipped back in. Invisible again, I explored. It wasn't just a meadow. There was a cabin, a beach, a cityscape that shimmered like glass. They'd spent months on this, layering it with details. Her favorite flowers, his old college football jersey hanging on a wall. It was theirs, a shrine to their bond. I recorded everything, every corner they'd touched, every whisper I could catch. That night, Ryan came over. He clapped me on the shoulder, grinned like nothing was wrong. "How's my favorite code monkey?" he asked, cracking open a beer. I smiled back, handed him a bottle. Same old, I said. Emma joined us, her laugh bright as she teased him about some dumb story from years ago. I watched them, cataloging every glance, every brush of their hands. They thought they were safe, thought I was oblivious. I let them believe it. By the end of the week, I had a plan. Step 1. Take their world and twist it. I started coding, building a mirror of their VR space on a separate server. It looked identical, same meadow, same cabin, but it was mine. I added traps, glitches that would log their inputs, subtle distortions to unnerve them. Step 2. Expose them, but not to me, to each other. I'd plant seeds, make them doubt, let their perfect escape crumble from the inside. The cruelty came in step 3. I wouldn't just destroy their world, I'd make it public. I'd leak fragments to their friends, their families, the art community Emma loved, the gym buddies Ryan bragged to. Not enough to implicate me, just enough to humiliate them. Let them explain why they built this, why they'd chosen it over their real lives. I'd watch them squirm, watch the trust they'd stolen from me burn away. I sat in the garage that night, the laptop glowing, and felt a strange calm. This wasn't rage anymore, it was purpose. They'd taken my life apart. Now I'd take theirs, piece by calculated piece. The next few days were a blur of routine on the surface. Work, kids, dinners where Emma and I traded small talk like nothing had changed. But underneath, I was a machine, grinding through the steps I'd laid out. The mirror world was nearly complete. I'd spent nights in the garage, hunched over my laptop, tweaking the code until it was a perfect doppelganger of their private escape. Every detail matched. The way the sunlight filtered through the trees, the texture of the cabin's wooden floor. But I'd laced it with my own touches. Faint echoes that didn't belong, shadows that moved when they shouldn't. Subtle enough to unsettle, not enough to tip them off. I tested it first. Slipped into their original world as a ghost again. Watched them lounging by that glass city's fountain. Emma's avatar leaning into Ryan's like it was the most natural thing. My stomach churned, but I stayed focused. I logged their patterns, when they entered, how long they stayed, what they said. Then I flipped the switch. Using Sam's toolkit, I rerouted their next login to my server without them noticing. The transition was seamless. They'd never know they were in my cage. The first crack came that Thursday. I was in the garage monitoring their session when I heard it through the audio feed, Emma's voice, sharp with confusion. "Did you hear that?" she asked. Ryan laughed it off. "What, the wind? You're imagining things." But I knew what she'd caught. A whisper I'd planted, a distorted version of her own laugh looping in the distance. She shook it off, but I saw her avatar hesitate, glancing around. Good. Doubt was a slow poison. I'd let it seep in. At dinner that night, she was quieter than usual. Max chattered about a science project. Lila begged for a sleepover. But Emma's eyes kept drifting to the window, her fork hovering over her plate. "You okay?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She blinked, forced a smile. "Just tired. Long day." I nodded, let it drop. She didn't know I'd seen her in the basement an hour earlier. Headset on, her fingers trembling as she logged out. Ryan texted me later, some casual nonsense about a basketball game. I replied like always, but I pictured him frowning at his own screen, wondering what had felt off. I upped the ante the next day, added flickering lights to the cabin, a door that creaked open on its own. When they logged in, I watched Ryan's avatar stumble over a chair that hadn't been there before. "This thing's glitching," he muttered. Emma laughed, but it was thin, nervous. "Maybe it's haunted," she said. I smirked in the dark of the garage. Haunted was right, just not the way they thought. By the weekend, they were bickering. I caught it on the feed. Ryan snapping about a missing painting she'd hung in their city. Emma accusing him of messing with her stuff. "You're paranoid," he shot back. She didn't reply, just logged out. When he showed up at the house that night, pretending it was about borrowing a ladder, the air between them was thick. I played dumb, offered him a beer, watched Emma fidget with her sketchbook. The trust they'd built in that world was fraying, and I hadn't even lifted a finger in the open yet. I lay awake that night, listening to Emma's breathing beside me, and felt the first real spark of satisfaction. This wasn't just about breaking them apart. It was about making them feel what I'd felt. The slow, sick unraveling of something you thought was yours. They'd built their betrayal on lies and clever tech, but I was better at this game. I'd spent years mastering systems, and now I'd turn theirs against them. The mirror world was just the start. Soon, I'd pull the curtain back and let the real wreckage begin. A week in, and the cracks were spreading. Emma started pulling away, not just from Ryan, but from me, from the kids, from everything. She'd always been the glue in our house, the one who kept the chaos in check, but now she was a ghost drifting through it. Mornings, she'd burn toast, forget to pack Lila's lunch. "Sorry, spaced out," she'd mutter, avoiding my eyes. I'd shrug, kiss her forehead, play the part of the clueless husband. Inside, I was tallying every slip, every sign my plan was working. In the mirror world, I turned up the heat. I'd recorded their voices from earlier sessions, little snippets of laughter, teasing, promises, and started splicing them in at odd moments. Emma's avatar would freeze mid-step, hearing Ryan's voice whisper her name from nowhere. "Did you say something?" she'd ask, her tone sharp. He'd scowl, shake his head. "You're losing it." Once, I looped a fragment of her saying, "This is ours," over and over until she yanked off her headset. I saw it on the logs, her session cutting out abruptly. Ryan stayed longer that time, pacing their meadow alone, muttering to himself. I kept tabs on them in the real world too. Ryan stopped dropping by as often, and when he did, their banter felt forced, brittle. One night, he showed up while I was grilling in the backyard. Emma was inside, supposedly sketching, but I'd seen her sneak downstairs earlier. "Hey, man," Ryan said, hands in his pockets, his grin not reaching his eyes. "How's it going?" I flipped a burger, smiled back. "Can't complain." "You?" He hesitated, shrugged. "Yeah, good. Just busy." I nodded, let the silence hang. He left 10 minutes later, no beer, no small talk with Emma. Whatever they had was rotting, and I was the one holding the knife. The kids noticed too. Lila asked me one night, "Is Mom okay? She's weird lately." I ruffled her hair, told her Mom was just stressed about work. Max chimed in, "She doesn't read to me anymore." That stung. Emma used to do voices for his bedtime stories, a ritual they'd had since he was 3. Now she'd mumble excuses and disappear to the basement. I hated that they were collateral in this, but I couldn't stop. Not now. I dug deeper into their original world, pulling files they'd hidden. Photos, real ones, not avatars, of them at a park last summer, her head on his shoulder. Notes they'd left each other. Stupid little things like, "Miss you already?" and "Meet me at the fountain." It wasn't just a fling. It was a life they'd been building, brick by brick, while I was upstairs playing dad. My hands shook as I saved it all to a drive. Evidence. Ammunition. Then I escalated. I rewrote a chunk of the mirror world's code, turned their sunny meadow into a storm, dark clouds, rain that stung their avatars, wind that howled with distorted versions of their own voices. I watched the next day as they logged in, saw Emma's avatar stumble in the mud, Ryan cursing as he tried to pull her up. "What's happening?" she yelled over the noise. "I don't know," he shouted back. They logged out fast, but the damage was done. That night, she snapped at me over nothing, spilled milk on the counter, and stormed off. I cleaned it up, humming to myself. Ryan called her later, I saw the log on her phone when she left it on the table. I didn't listen, didn't need to. The tension was palpable now. Their perfect escape turning into a nightmare they couldn't explain. I sat in the garage, staring at the drive with their secrets, and felt the next piece click into place. They were unraveling, but it wasn't enough. I wanted them to drown in it. Every lie, every stolen moment. And I was just getting started. By the second week, they were at each other's throats. I caught fragments on the feed. Emma accusing Ryan of changing things in their world. Him firing back that she was the one screwing it up. "You're not even trying anymore," she'd yelled during one session, her avatar storming off into the glitchy rain I'd coded. He didn't chase her, just stood there, fists clenched, before logging out. In the real world, it bled through too. Ryan hadn't come by in days, and Emma's phone stayed silent. No late-night texts, no secret smiles. She was fraying, and I was the quiet architect of it all. I pushed harder, reworked their cityscape next, turned the glass towers into jagged ruins, the streets into mazes that looped back on themselves. I added echoes of their old conversations, twisted now. Her laugh morphing into a sob, his promises warping into static. When they logged in, I watched Emma's avatar spin in circles, shouting, "Where are we?" Ryan tried to lead, but the paths shifted under him. "This isn't right," he growled. She snapped, "You think I don't know that?" They lasted 10 minutes before bailing. I leaned back in my chair, the garage's cold air sharp against my skin, and grinned. Their sanctuary was a prison now. Emma started unraveling faster. She forgot Lila's soccer game, left Max waiting at school until I got a call from the office. "Everything okay at home?" the principal asked, her voice careful. I lied, said Emma was under the weather. When I got home, she was in the basement, headset off, staring at the wall. "You all right?" I asked, leaning in the doorway. She jumped, nodded too quick. "Fine. Just tired." Her eyes were red, her hands unsteady. I didn't push, just watched her shuffle upstairs, a shadow of the woman I'd married. Ryan cracked too. I ran into him at the hardware store, picking up paint for Max's room. He looked rough, bags under his eyes, stubble patchy like he'd given up shaving. "Hey, stranger," I said, clapping his shoulder. He flinched, forced a laugh. "Yeah, been busy. Work's a mess." I nodded, casual as ever. "You should swing by. Emma's been off lately. Could use the company." His jaw tightened, and he mumbled something about being swamped before bolting. I watched him go, knowing he wasn't sleeping either. That night I crossed a line, took the drive with their photos, their notes, and started editing. Subtle stuff, cropping them into scenes from the mirror world, adding timestamps that didn't match their alibis. I built a narrative. Emma and Ryan, sneaking off while I was at work, laughing behind my back. It wasn't all true, but it didn't need to be. Truth was flexible when you had the tools. I uploaded it to a burner account on a forum their art crowd frequented. Titled it, "Caught in the Act." Didn't name them outright, just dropped enough hints. Let the whispers start. The fallout hit fast. Emma's phone buzzed at breakfast the next morning. She glanced at it, went pale, and excused herself. I heard her pacing upstairs, voice low and frantic. Calling Ryan, I'd bet. When she came down, she was jittery, picking at her nails. "Something wrong?" I asked, sipping my coffee. "No," she said too fast. "Just gallery stuff." I smiled, let it go. She didn't know I'd seen the forum thread explode. Her friends asking questions. Ryan's name popping up in the replies. By evening, they tried one last time. Logged into the mirror world together, desperate to fix it. I'd saved the worst for now. Turned the meadow into a void, black sky, no ground, just their avatars floating in nothingness. Their voices crackled through the feed. Panicked. "What is this?" Emma cried. Ryan shouted, "I didn't do this." Then silence, they were gone. I checked the logs. Both accounts inactive. They'd hit their breaking point. I sat back, the garage silent except for the laptop's hum, and felt the weight lift. They were done. Shattered in their own world, cracking in mine. But I wasn't finished. The real revenge was still coming, and it would be merciless. The next morning, the air in the house felt heavy, like the calm before a storm you can't outrun. Emma barely spoke, moved through breakfast like a robot, her eyes darting to her phone every few minutes. I pretended not to notice, helped Max with his cereal, asked Lila about her homework. Normalcy was my mask now, and I wore it well. But I knew what was brewing. The forum post had spread overnight. Screenshots bouncing between group chats, vague questions turning into pointed guesses. Is this Emma T? Someone had written. Looks like Ryan's truck in the background, another added. The whispers were growing teeth. I checked the burner account from my laptop in the garage. The thread was a wildfire. Dozens of replies, some outraged, some gleeful. Emma's art friends were circling, piecing it together. Ryan's gym pals chimed in too, tossing around theories. I'd planted just enough, those edited photos, the cryptic captions, to let their imaginations do the rest. No hard proof, no direct accusation. Just a spark, and they'd lit the blaze themselves. Emma left the house mid-morning, muttering something about a supply run. I didn't buy it. She was gone too long for paintbrushes, and when she came back, her face was tight, her hands clutching her bag like it was a lifeline. Everything okay? I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. She nodded, avoided my eyes. Yeah, just ran into someone. I didn't press. I didn't need to. The logs on my spare laptop showed she'd tried logging into their world again. Alone this time. She'd lasted 3 minutes in the void I'd made before bailing. Ryan called me that afternoon. First time in days. His voice was rough, like he'd been yelling, or not sleeping. Hey man, you got a sec? He asked. Kept it light. Sure, what's up? He hesitated, then said, just checking in. How's Emma? I smirked into the phone. She's been off. You should talk to her. Cheer her up. He mumbled something, hung up fast. He didn't know I'd heard the strain, the guilt threading through his words. They were drowning, and I was the one holding their heads under. By evening, it hit critical mass. Emma's phone rang nonstop. Gallery contacts, friends, even her sister. She took the calls upstairs, her voice muffled but sharp. I caught pieces, no, it's not true. And I don't know how this started. When she came down, she looked like she'd aged a decade. Pale, eyes sunken. Bad day? I asked, flipping through a magazine I wasn't reading. She stared at me, searching my face for something. Yeah, she said finally. Really bad. I nodded, let her stew in it. The kids were at a friend's house, thank God. I didn't want them seeing this yet. I slipped into the garage, pulled up the forum. Someone had dug up an old photo of Emma and Ryan from a barbecue we'd hosted. Nothing damning, just them laughing too close. The comments were brutal. Always knew she was shady. Poor Daniel. Ryan's a snake. I didn't care about the pity. I cared that they were bleeding out in public, their perfect lie exposed to everyone but me. At least as far as they knew. I tweaked the mirror world one last time. Restored the meadow, but twisted. Flowers wilted. Sky bruised purple. Their avatars locked in place, staring at each other across a chasm. I left a message in the air, glowing red. You built this. Now live in it. They wouldn't see it yet, but when they did, it'd be the final nail. I leaned back, the garage's chill sinking into my bones, and felt the calm before the real storm. This was just the warm-up. The fallout kept rolling. Emma barely left the house the next day, said she was sick, but I saw her pacing the living room, phone clutched tight. The calls had slowed, replaced by texts she didn't answer. I kept busy, took the kids to the park, let her simmer in whatever mess she was dodging. When we got back, she was in the kitchen, staring at a cold cup of tea. Feeling better? I asked, casual as ever. She nodded, didn't look up. A little. I smiled, left her to it. She didn't suspect I was the one stirring the pot. Ryan showed up that night, unannounced. First time in over a week. The kids were in bed, and I was in the garage when I heard his truck rumble in. I watched through the window as he knocked, hesitant, like he wasn't sure he belonged anymore. Emma let him in, and I slipped upstairs, quiet as a shadow, to listen from the hall. Their voices were low, urgent. "We need to stop," she said. "It's too much, people are talking." Ryan's tone was bitter. "You think I don't know that? My boss asked me about it today." Silence stretched. Then she whispered, "What if Daniel finds out?" I froze, my pulse hammering. They still thought I was in the dark. Ryan sighed. Heavy. "He's clueless. Always has been." Anger flared in my chest, but I swallowed it. "Let them dig deeper." Emma's voice cracked. "I can't keep doing this. It's not the same anymore, the world, us. It's falling apart." Ryan snapped. "You're the one who wanted this. I just followed." She didn't reply, and I heard the couch creak as someone stood. "I need to think," she said. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I waited, then walked downstairs like I'd just come in. Emma was on the couch, head in her hands. "Ryan was here?" I asked, feigning surprise. She jolted, nodded. "Yeah, just dropped off something." I raised an eyebrow, looked tense. "Everything okay?" She hesitated, then forced a smile. "Fine, just tired." I sat beside her, close enough to feel her flinch. "You sure? You've been off lately." "Him too." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching again, but I kept my face soft, concerned. She swallowed. "It's nothing, really." I let it hang, then said, "You know you can tell me anything, right?" Her breath hitched, and for a second I thought she'd crack. Spill it all right there. But she just nodded, leaned into me like she used to. "I know," she whispered. I held her, my arm steady, my mind racing. She was teetering, and I'd nudged her closer to the edge. The next day, I leaked more. Sent an anonymous email to her gallery director with a screenshot of one of their notes, timestamped during a workday. By noon, she got a call that left her shaking. "They're postponing my show," she told me, voice hollow. "Said there's concern about my reputation." I frowned, played dumb. "That's ridiculous. What's going on?" She shook her head, didn't answer. I saw the panic in her eyes, the realization that this wasn't dying down. Ryan texted me later, asked to meet. I picked a bar, neutral ground. He looked like hell, shirt wrinkled, hands restless. "Something's up with Emma," he said, beer untouched. "She's freaking out." I leaned back, casual. "Yeah, she's been weird. You know anything?" He stared at me, jaw tight, then shook his head. "No, just worried." I clapped his shoulder. "We'll figure it out, man. Together." He nodded, but I saw the doubt flicker. He was trapped, and I was tightening the noose. Emma broke first. It was Saturday, the kids at a birthday party, the house too quiet. I found her in the basement, headset in her lap, tears streaking her face. She didn't hear me come in, didn't see me until I said, "Hey." She gasped, fumbled to hide the headset, but it was too late. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping closer. She wiped her eyes, voice shaky. "Nothing. Just overwhelmed." I knelt beside her, gentle. "You've been like this for weeks. Talk to me." She cracked then, spilled it all, or at least the version she could bear to tell. "I've been escaping. With Ryan. In this virtual thing we made. It was just a game at first, but it got out of hand." Her words tumbled out, jagged with guilt. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I swear." I listened, face calm, heart pounding. She didn't know I'd seen it, built it, torn it down. "How long?" I asked, voice low. "Months," she whispered. "But it's over now. I ended it." I nodded, let the silence stretch. "Why him?" She flinched, shook her head. "I don't know. He was there and I felt lost." I stood, paced, let her squirm. "You should have told me," I said finally. "I could have helped." She sobbed, reached for me, but I stepped back. "I need time," I told her, walking out. She didn't follow. Ryan was next. He showed up that night, frantic. "She told you?" he blurted when I opened the door. I nodded, face hard now. "Yeah, everything." He paled, stammered. "Man, I'm sorry. It wasn't, I didn't plan it. I cut him off. Save it. You're done here. He stared, then left, shoulders slumped. I shut the door, locked it. The mirror world was my last move. I logged in, saw their avatars still frozen in that twisted meadow, the red message glowing. I deleted it all, every line of code, every trace, wiped their original too, using Sam's tools to shred the server beyond recovery. Their escape was ash now, and they'd never rebuild it. Emma stayed upstairs all night, crying. I sat in the garage, staring at the blank laptop screen, and felt the weight settle. They'd confessed, crumbled, but it wasn't enough. The public still buzzed. Her career was tanking, his reputation trashed. I'd let that simmer, let it finish them. I wasn't done hurting them yet. They'd taken my trust, my life, and I'd make sure they paid every last dime. The days after Emma's confession were a slow bleed. She hovered around me, trying to patch things up with quiet apologies and extra coffee in the morning, but I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to play the forgiving husband. Not when I could still hear her voice in that virtual meadow, laughing with Ryan like I didn't exist. The kids picked up on it too. Lila asked why Mom was so sad. Max clung to me more than usual. I told them everything was fine, kept the house running, but inside, I was sharpening the next piece of my plan. The public storm hadn't died down. Emma's gallery show was officially canceled. Her director sent a curt email citing personal circumstances. But the rumor mill was louder. Her art friends stopped calling, and I caught her scrolling through messages late at night, her face crumpling as she read the silence between the lines. Ryan wasn't faring better. Word got back to me through a mutual friend. His gym buddies had iced him out, and his boss was reviewing his position after the whispers hit the office. I didn't feel sorry for them. They'd rolled the dice. I just stacked the table. I turned my focus to the final cut. I'd already burned their virtual world, but I had one last card, the evidence I'd hoarded. Those photos, notes, the logs of their sessions. I'd kept it all on that drive, a digital time bomb. I spent a night in the garage, refining it, edited the timestamps to look seamless, wove their words into a story that painted them as calculated, cruel. Then I packaged it, anonymous, untraceable, and sent it to a local blogger known for digging into scandals. Cheating wife and best friend exposed in VR affair. I titled the tip. No names, just enough meat to hook her. It dropped the next morning. I was at the kitchen table, sipping coffee, when Emma's phone buzzed with the link. She opened it, froze, her mug slipping from her hand. It shattered on the tile, coffee pooling like blood. "Daniel," she whispered, eyes wide. I looked up, calm. "What's wrong?" She turned the screen to me. There it was, her face blurred but recognizable, Ryan's too, alongside screenshots of their notes, their avatars tangled in that meadow. The blogger had eaten it up, spun it into a juicy tale of betrayal and tech. "Who did this?" she asked, voice breaking. I shrugged, kept my face blank. "No idea. People are awful." She didn't buy it, not fully. I saw the flicker in her eyes, the first thread of suspicion. But she didn't push, just sank into a chair, hands trembling. The kids were at school, thank God. I didn't want them seeing her like this. Not yet. The blog post spread fast. By noon, it was on every social feed in town. Her sister called, furious, demanding answers. Ryan texted me. A single word. "How?" I didn't reply. Let him twist. That night, I watched her from the doorway as she sat on the couch, staring at nothing. The woman I'd loved was gone, replaced by this hollow shell, crushed under the weight of her own choices and my quiet fury. I didn't say a word, just turned and went to bed. She didn't follow. The blade was in deep now, and I'd let it sit, let it carve them apart piece by piece. The fallout was relentless. By Monday, Emma's name was mud in every circle she'd cared about. The gallery blacklisted her, citing reputational risk. Her online shop, where she sold prints, tanked as reviews piled up, strangers calling her a fraud, a homewrecker. She tried to fight back, posted a shaky apology on her page, claiming it was misunderstood, but the comments tore her apart. "Liar," they said. "Disgusting. I read it over her shoulder one night, silent, while she scrolled and sobbed. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. I didn't answer. Ryan's collapse was uglier. He lost his job, officially downsizing. But everyone knew. His wife, Sarah, who I'd always liked, left him that week, took their kid and moved to her mom's. I heard it from a neighbor, saw the moving truck parked outside his place. He called me drunk late one night. "I didn't mean it, Dan," he slurred. "She started it. I messed up." I listened, cold. "Yeah, you did," I said, then hung up. He didn't call again. The kids were my line in the sand. I kept them shielded, told their teachers to squash any gossip, drove them to school myself so they wouldn't hear whispers on the bus. But they felt it. Lila stopped bringing friends over. Max asked why Mom cried all the time. I held them close, promised it'd get better, even if I wasn't sure what better looked like anymore. Emma tried to play normal, made pancakes, read to Max, but her hands shook, her voice cracked. They saw through it and I let them. She'd built this mess. She could face their eyes. I stayed the steady one, went to work, kept the house running, smiled when it mattered. People started calling me strong, patting my back at the grocery store like I was some saint. "You don't deserve this," they'd say. I'd nod, thank them, let the pity fuel the fire. Emma watched me, though, those flickers of doubt growing. One night, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Did you know?" she asked, voice low. "Before I told you?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "No," I lied. "You hid it well." She stared, then nodded, but I saw the seed take root. I checked the blog again, hundreds of shares, comments piling up. Someone had ID'd them fully now, no blurs needed. Their faces were everywhere, tied to every ugly word I'd fed the machine. I'd stopped adding fuel. It didn't need me anymore. The town had taken over, ripping them to shreds. I sat in the garage, the laptop dark, and felt a strange emptiness. The revenge was working, better than I'd dreamed, but it didn't fill the hole they'd left. Not yet. Emma packed a bag that weekend, said she was going to her sister's to figure things out. I didn't stop her. "Take what you need," I said, voice flat. She hesitated, like she wanted me to fight for her, but I just turned away. The door clicked shut and the house went still. I stood there, alone, and wondered if this was victory or just the echo of one. Emma was gone 3 days before she texted. "Can we talk?" I didn't reply right away. Let her wait. Let her feel the silence she'd earned. The kids asked where she was. I said she needed a break, kept it vague. They nodded, too young to push, but old enough to sense the fracture. I cooked dinner, helped with homework, tucked them in. The house felt bigger without her, but not empty. Not yet. Ryan vanished too, no calls, no texts. I drove by his place one night, saw the for sale sign staked in the yard. The truck was gone, windows dark. He'd run or been run off. Didn't matter which. The blog had slowed, but the damage was done. His name was a punchline now, hers a warning. I'd gutted their lives, left them nothing to rebuild with. Should have felt good, but it didn't. It just felt finished. When Emma came back, she looked like a stranger. Hair limp, eyes dull. We sat in the living room, kids upstairs, the clock ticking too loud. "I'm sorry," she started, voice small. "I know it's not enough, but I am." I leaned back, arms crossed. "Why'd you do it?" She flinched, twisted her hands. I felt stuck. "You were always so steady, and I wanted something else." Ryan was there. I nodded, let her words hang. "And now," she swallowed, "I want to fix us. If you'll let me." I didn't answer right away. Looked at her, really looked, and saw the woman I'd loved, buried under the wreckage she'd made. "I don't know if I can," I said finally. "You didn't just break trust, Emma. You built a whole world without me." She cried then, quiet, no defense left. I didn't comfort her, just watched. That night, I sat in the garage, the drive in my hand. I could have kept going, leaked more, twisted the knife deeper. But I didn't. I crushed it under my heel, ground the plastic into dust. The war was over, I'd won. Emma stayed, tiptoeing around me trying to rebuild. I let her, but I didn't help. Ryan was gone, a ghost I'd banished. The town moved on, found new gossip. Life crept back in, piece by jagged piece. I'd ruined them, cruelly, completely, and it was done. But as I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I wondered what I'd rebuilt in the ashes. A family? A shell? The kids laughed again. The house hummed, but something was missing. Maybe it was me. Weeks passed and Emma stayed. She didn't push, didn't beg, just moved through the house like she was auditioning for a role she'd lost. She cooked dinners I didn't ask for, sat with the kids doing crafts, left me notes. Simple things like, "I'm trying," or "Thank you for letting me stay." I read them, folded them into my pocket, said nothing. The kids adjusted. Lila started smiling again. Max stopped asking questions. They needed her, and I couldn't take that away, no matter how hollow I felt. Work kept me steady. I threw myself into projects, stayed late, let the hum of code drown out the noise in my head. People there knew, whispers about that blog post followed me, but they didn't pry. I was good at my job, better now, sharper. Revenge had honed me, turned me into something precise, unyielding. But at home, that edge dulled. I'd sit across from Emma at dinner, her eyes searching mine, and wonder if I'd ever feel anything but cold. She tried to talk again one night after the kids were asleep. Rain tapped the windows, a soft rhythm against the silence. "I know you hate me," she said, standing in the kitchen doorway, arms wrapped around herself. I looked up from my laptop, neutral. "I don't hate you." It wasn't a lie. Hate was too hot, too alive. What I felt was emptier, a cavern where trust used to be. She stepped closer. "Then what? You barely look at me." I closed the screen, met her gaze. "You broke us, Emma. I don't know what's left." She nodded, tears welling but not falling. "I'll keep trying. For the kids. For you, if you'll let me." I didn't answer, just watched her retreat upstairs. She was fighting to rebuild, but I wasn't sure I wanted to. I'd won, crushed her and Ryan, turned their world to rubble, but the victory tasted like ash. The house stood, the family limped on, yet I was a stranger in it. I'd torn them down, but what had I built? Ryan's absence lingered too. I heard he'd moved out of state, started over somewhere quiet. No one knew where, and I didn't care enough to dig. His house sold cheap, a young couple moving in, oblivious to the ghost they'd inherited. I drove by once, saw their kid bouncing a ball in the yard, and felt a pang. Not guilt, but something close. He'd been my friend, my brother, and I'd erased him. Necessary, I told myself. Still, the echo of his laugh stuck with me, a memory I couldn't delete. I kept the garage as my sanctuary. No more laptops humming, no more plotting. Just a chair, a beer, the quiet. I'd sit there, replaying it all. The headset, the mirror world, the blog. Every move had been perfect, surgical, and it had worked. They were broken, I was standing. But the kids' laughter upstairs, Emma's tentative steps downstairs. They pulled at something I didn't want to name. I'd protected them, avenged them. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling I'd lost more than I'd gained. Spring came, softening the edges of the world outside. The kids bounded into it, soccer games, picnics, normalcy I clung to for their sake. Emma kept up her quiet repair, painting again, small pieces she didn't show anyone. She'd leave them on the counter sometimes, flowers or landscapes, like offerings I never acknowledged. I saw the effort, the plea in every brushstroke, but I couldn't reach back. Not yet, maybe not ever. The town forgot, mostly. New scandals took over, some councilman's affair, a shoplifting ring. Emma's name faded from the chatter, Ryan's too. Her career didn't recover, though. She worked part-time at a craft store now, a shadow of the artist she'd been. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. The wreckage was there in her hunched shoulders, her clipped answers when customers recognized her. I'd done that, and it was done. One afternoon, Lila brought home a drawing, our family, stick figures under a blue sky. She'd labeled us, Dad, Mom, me, Max, smiley faces, holding hands. I pinned it to the fridge, stared at it too long. That's what they saw, what they needed. But I didn't feel like that dad anymore, steady, warm. I was something else now, a man who'd burned a bridge and stood on the ashes, watching the smoke clear. Emma saw it too. "They're happy," she said one night, catching me at the fridge. I nodded. "They are." She didn't ask if I was. I started running again, mornings before dawn. The rhythm of it, breath, pavement, heartbeat, kept my head clear. I'd pass Ryan's old place, the new family's lights glowing, and think about the years we'd had. College nights, road trips, him at my wedding, grinning as I said my vows. Gone now, all of it because of what they'd done and what I'd done back. I didn't regret it, not exactly. But the cost crept in, a quiet ache I couldn't outrun. Emma's sister visited one weekend, a rare thaw after months of frost. She hugged me, awkward, said, "You're a good man, Daniel. Stronger than most." I smiled, thanked her, but the words rang hollow. Strong, sure, but good? I'd orchestrated ruin, watched it unfold with a steady hand. Necessary, yes. Noble, no. Emma watched us from the couch, her sister's arm around her, and I saw the question in her eyes again. "Did you know?" I turned away, let her wonder. Nights grew longer, the garage colder. I'd sit there, tracing the cracks in my victory. The kids thrived, Emma clawed her way back. But me, I was stuck, tethered to the moment I'd crushed that drive. I'd won, undeniably, yet the prize was a life I didn't fully fit into. The revenge had been cruel, perfect, but it hadn't healed me. It had just cleared the board. Summer hit and the kids begged for a trip. Some lake an hour away, a tradition we'd skipped last year. Emma looked at me, hopeful, like it could be a reset. I said yes, packed the car, drove us there. They splashed in the water, squealing, while we sat on a blanket, the sun warm on our skin. She reached for my hand, tentative. I let her take it, felt her fingers curl into mine, but mine stayed limp. "This is nice," she said, voice soft. I nodded. "Yeah." We kept going like that, surface normal, undercurrents deep. She painted more, sold a few pieces quietly. The kids grew, their world intact, oblivious to the war that had raged around them. I worked, ran, sat in the garage less. Life stitched itself back, uneven but holding. Emma stopped asking if I'd forgive her, just lived it instead, day by day. I watched, waited, didn't push either way. One night, I found an old photo in a drawer, me, Emma, Ryan years back, grinning at a barbecue. I stared at it, the faces frozen in a time before the betrayal, before the revenge. I didn't feel anger anymore, or triumph, just a tired sadness, a recognition of what we'd all lost. I tucked it away, didn't show her. Some things didn't need revisiting. The garage stayed empty now, the chair gathering dust. I dismantled the last of my tools. The laptop, the drive scraps. Months ago, buried them in a landfill. No evidence, no echoes, just us limping forward. The kids laughed downstairs. Emma hummed in the kitchen, and I stood at the window, looking out at a neighborhood that didn't know our scars. I'd torn them down, ruthlessly, and rebuilt something. Fractured, but standing. I didn't forgive her, not fully. Didn't forget him. But I stayed. For Lila, for Max, for the shadow of what we'd been. The revenge was done. Its cruelty a memory I carried alone. And in the quiet, I wondered if that was enough.